Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome, YouTube. Welcome to our book study, everyone. We're so happy that you're here. And welcome, Jenny. Hi, Jenny.
Hi, Bill. Lovely to see you. Lovely to see everyone.
It's so good to be with all of you every week. I'm glad that this is like this isn't, even though it's a big commitment, it has so much fun attached to it and such a pull. And you only need to get, a little bit into the book in preparation for today's call to go, oh my God, oh my God. You know what I mean? I know you guys know what I'm talking about. This chapter 14, Jenny, is so potent. It's
It's
just,
amazing.
yeah,
Yes.
it's really amazing. And
Mhm.
I'm just so grateful that Francis, uh, he comes in here just a regular guy. He knows that we're all thirsty and hungry and just a pull for the truth. And he just comes in and he's so brilliant in in these meetings. Really
Yes.
good. So today's title is the desire for the absolute. And it's chapter 14. We only have, you see how thin this is? We only have a few more pages left, and we're going to be finished with this. We're going to take a month break or so, and then we'll get into Rupert's his meditation series, as I mentioned before. And so let's get started with chapter 14, and we'll stop about halfway through. If you have a real question, put a Q in front of it so it's easy to find, please. And then Rick, our amazing Rick West, he always sends one in by email, something very could be controversial, could be like what about this? And Rick has done it again. He has a great question for us that we'll look at after about halfway through, or unless we hit it in one of these pages first. But Jenny, what would you like to look at on the beginning?
Well, let's start where we left off. So on page 208. So that'll be Kindle 183, with the question, in the coming out of what we are not, there's a fraction of a second in which this presence is available. And that question is really pointing towards the gaps between thoughts and perceptions, in which presence just shines in its purity. And Francis agrees that it's important to experience presence in the absence of objects, because that's how we come to love it. He says, therefore, at the beginning and the end of the manifestation of an object, we start to experience this light. It is like an arch that builds itself. At some point, this presence is continuous throughout the manifestation of objects, although at these times it's more subdued than when we dive completely into it. So diving completely into it is important.
Yes, yes, and that's kind of what we're doing here. It feels like it. This is what we're doing. We're diving into the content of the idea, and I also love what he said before. And this gives new people hope. It gives those of us that are, that are just sort of. I mean, I've been in love with Francis for about 3 years. Rupert about five. Muji 10 years ago. So, and Jesus 25 years before that. So I've just really had this constant pull of wanting to know more. But Francis, right here in the very second sentence of the first paragraph, I like what he said here. He says, in the beginning, we don't have the skill to find it easily. We don't have the skill to find this this gap that you're talking about. And but at some point, our search comes to an end, and it comes to an end in this presence. As we understand deeply that objects arise out of it, as we understand this deeply, and I like what he said here, this is so cool. When a fish comes out of water, it is still wet with the water in which it was immersed.
Yes, yes.
Right? So we're just in the water as we discuss these ideas, as we reread and feel the connection that he's pointing to. We're that fish. You're all fish. I really like the way he described that. It feels really accurate, and that's why there's such a love for the truth. Yeah, and then it goes on to say that we merge, like you said, we merge with that experience.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And then let's see, there's another question. There's the next question is, at the receipt of an impression, there is a point at which we give attention. Then there is only that impression arising, and it is strangely attractive. The teaching is that the mind can only have one impression at a time. And it's almost like this list of questions are almost like affirmations. They're affirming what they've learned so far.
Yes, yes. I think there's probably something behind that question, which is maybe a concern that you can lose yourself in a particular impression. And I think he says later that that's not really the case, because he starts very simply by saying that that's true, but this impression can be quite complex. And then the questioner goes on, I think, to clarify that question. She says, yes, and very fast. However, in placing full attention and almost losing yourself, you experience a sort of ecstasy. And Francis says that only works if you relax the focus of your attention from the object, because it's through that relaxation that presence seems to be much more apparent. And he goes on to use the analogy of a theatre and a play. When you know the play so well, you don't need to give full attention to what the actors are saying or doing, and you're able to notice the set. So a little bit like what we were talking about last time with the faces in the rock.
Yes, yes. Yeah. Yeah, that was really good. And I like, he gives another instruction or another suggestion on how to notice or how to realize the experience is in the relaxing of the focus.
Yes, that's really important.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
In the next question, it says, the question is, does mind have a choice? Okay, Rick. Rick is up.
That's Rick's question. So Francis answers by saying it's important to distinguish. He says mind has no choice. So Rick has asked. He says Francis states that mind has no choice. This statement seems 100% true from the perspective of a separate individual, doesn't actually exist. However, what we refer to as mind is a manifestation of awareness. Thus, from this perspective, there is free will that belongs to awareness itself. Thus, awareness has free will and chooses. If awareness wasn't free to choose, it seems manifestation would just unfold according to some determined script. That's determinism. The free will versus determinism argument seems somewhat similar to the particle versus wave argument of classical physics, classical versus quantum physics. So what I'd say is, first of all, yes, mind is a manifestation of awareness, but then so are tables and chairs and mountains and rivers. We would never claim that those things choose anything. So if you say awareness chooses, you have to be careful that you're not conceptualizing awareness as an object. Rick said, if awareness wasn't free to choose, it seems manifestation would just unfold according to some determined script. I don't really go along with this because there could just be conformance to a pattern with some element of randomness built in. So, for example, in the double slit experiment of quantum physics, in which the slit which the electron goes through is random, and the wave pattern, so that's where you bring the wave in, defines the probability distribution, and that there's no agency that is actually choosing, it just happens. And that's actually not too different from tossing a coin. There is complete freedom, but there's nothing really that chooses. Things just happen. So in a way, we can say awareness chooses, but in another sense, whatever happens is going to happen.
Yeah, I think it's the word choosing. Like, okay, do I have vanilla or chocolate ice cream? Do I go left or do I go right? No, it's only the mind that can say, oh, a decision was made. It's only the mind that would think a choice was made out of the flow and movement of spontaneous. It's occurring.
Yes, exactly. It's just a superimposition by the mind. The mind sees something happening and says, "Oh, there must be a choice." Because there must be a choice, then there must be a chooser. But that's not actually the case. It's just the way the mind thinks about it.
Rick, you want to comment?
No, that's very helpful because it almost sounds like it's the best that the mind can do. It's really no free will, but it depends. Like Jenny said, from perspective in which you look at it. I would say there's no chooser. It can appear to be a choosing. That's the freedom of awareness. But no, as soon as we say there's a chooser, we've made it an objective entity, so to speak. Very good conversation. I love that.
Yeah. It is. I knew that that statement, "mind has no choice," was going to bring. I should have known it was going to be you, but. You're a guy that you like to challenge. Okay, well, let's look at this statement. And I like what you do, Rick. I appreciate your involvement in these kinds of statements and questions, because it does appear, to the mind, it does appear that there might have been a choice made. But when you live in the flow of in the freedom of movement, where you trust what is, then there's no choice. There's just, and that's what this journey has done for me and for many of us, all of us really, that we realize, oh my God, I can take my interest off of the ball. My investment can dissolve, and when the investment dissolves, guess who stops suffering.
Yeah.
Yes,
And
yeah.
to me, determinism sounds a lot like regular physics, that everything is based upon a prior event, cause and effect, laws of physics, whereas free will kind of more goes along with quantum physics and probabilities. It could be this or it could be that,
Yes. Einstein wasn't too keen on quantum mechanics initially, and he very famously said, "God does not play dice."
That's right. That's right. So whoever you are that's watching and listening, you did not pick your partner. You didn't pick your job. You didn't pick the mind that has your name just took credit for it after the seeming choice occurred. How does that sound? That sounds pretty wild, right?
Yes.
Yeah, pretty wild. Uh, the statement that Francis says here in the just below the question, it even chooses the one who feels that he does or does not, or he or she does or does not have a choice. It even chooses the one who feels. Right? So it's and it doesn't even choose that because it's a seemingly chooser.
Yes. Yes, it
That
was quite a tricky reply, that one, wasn't it?
yeah, yeah,
But I think he was having fun too. Yes, he says that's why it's so tricky. It's very well made. That's
yeah.
very good.
Well, I like that. It says that feeling. So when you have a feeling, you have like a reaction. Even that feeling is chosen at the moment by consciousness. That is why it is so tricky. It is very well made.
Yes.
Yeah,
Mm.
I like that. And I think that really kind of summarizes that statement of the chooser. And I take comfort in his clarity in this.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's lovely. Well, there is a little bit more in the next question. Why would consciousness choose to be depressed or angry or mean? And that's really equivalent to the question, if what we are is universal consciousness, then why is there ignorance? And Francis says that consciousness chooses to play the game of ignorance out of its own freedom. He gives this rather strange analogy of a Swiss cheese with holes in it, and the solid cheese is like consciousness, and the holes are like our perceptions, which seem to temporarily take us away from consciousness. I found that quite a weird analogy, but I suppose what's happening with Swiss cheese is that the holes are made of little bubbles of carbon dioxide, presumably, which form when the cheese is just turning itself into cheese when it's sort of soft and warm and hasn't quite become cheese yet. And so that's a little bit like the sort of bubbles of perception which come into our minds from time to time. So I think that may be the basis behind the analogy, but I certainly found it a difficult one to get to grips with.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and also what this brings is it brings the question about Hitler back. It brings the question about
Yes.
horrific events in history that have really slaughtered and hurt millions and millions of people. And consciousness actually did that to itself in the play. And when you're in the event or you're related to someone that was in the event or somehow personally involved, it doesn't feel like a play at all. It feels very serious, and that is why on this spiritual path we learn and understand that there is a way to engage in life but not take it so serious if you're going to have the best experience in this bodysuit.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
He says on page 210, at the level of the personal entity, we have no freedom at all. At the level of consciousness, we are absolute freedom. In terms of a personal entity, we cannot understand the absolute freedom that we are. We have to relinquish the notion of being a personal entity. And at that moment, we find ourselves as this freedom spontaneously and naturally. And then no question arises. And I think that that's almost the first step to understanding about these horrific situations that arise in the world. We understand it first within ourselves, and then we can apply it outside.
Yeah.
And he goes on to talk about choiceless awareness, and he says choiceless awareness means awareness that doesn't have an afterthought. There is nothing to change. Everything is created in the moment. So if choiceless awareness wants to change anything, it just changes it in the moment. And we so often sort of think about the past and when we ourselves have sort of fallen into ignorance in the past. And people often ask Francis about that. They say, well, ignorance keeps coming up, and I keep having these awful thoughts, and then sometimes I act on it and it's all dreadful. And what Francis often does is he refers them to a very old Bob Newhart video called "Stop It." I'll put the link on the chat. It's extremely funny, and it is a way of exactly as you say, bringing humour into the situation. So
Yeah. I'm aware of that video. It's really funny.
It's very funny, so it's there on the chat. It's funny, but it's a serious. It has a serious message from a spiritual point of view.
Yeah, it's Barbara has a good question on the chat that says, "Mind is the false identification to the thought I." To the thought I. What is before this?
What is before the thought I? Well, before the thought I is presumably a gap between thoughts. So that gap between thoughts would be pure consciousness.
Yeah. It would just be open space, isness. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
And then Amy said, if I, as the personal self, do not really exist, that my feelings of anger, depression, and meanness do not exist in reality either, love has no opposite. Yeah.
Well, in a way, the feelings do still exist because they exist in consciousness, and consciousness is making them. And consciousness is producing them, so they are there, but they're not feelings that belong to any kind of separate entity, and there's no one responsible for them. It's consciousness just playing a game.
That's the same thing, though, isn't it? Isn't
Yes.
that's saying there is no opposite to consciousness. There's no opposite to oneness. There's no opposite to love in the whole of everything, because everything rises out of this one thing.
Yes, there's no opposite to consciousness or any of the attributes of consciousness, but that doesn't stop all sorts of things, anything arising out of consciousness. And that's what Francis means by absolute freedom. So ignorance rises out of consciousness, wisdom rises out of consciousness, kindness rises out of consciousness, and unkindness rises out of consciousness. All of it happens, and it's all the play of consciousness, but no one's responsibility. So there's no one that is responsible for good, kind actions, and equally no one responsible for bad, unkind actions.
Right. And really, these ideas aren't to sort of put away personal responsibilities and say, oh, well, the devil made me do that. It's really to have an understanding so that you see the essence of how what's happening essentially in the background of all experience.
Yes, I mean, there is no me. That's the important thing. There is no me that the devil could make do anything. Assuming that the devil exists, the devil would also be a fabrication of consciousness.
Yes.
So there's no me, no devil, just consciousness.
Rick says, no personal responsibility does not imply passivity. Granted, there is no personal responsibility. Thus, a serial killer may not be personally responsible. True, however, this doesn't mean he shouldn't be locked away for life. Right.
Well, that's absolutely right. It's he's not personally responsible. There's all sorts of things which led that the whole universe led to those serial killings. Nothing to do with a person or a body mind. The whole universe led. The totality led to those events. But at the same time, society doesn't want more events like that. So it does lock people up, and most countries do have laws against killing, and they do lock people up if they find that they have killed.
Yeah. It's like talking about two different levels, though. Really, we're talking about in the dream, so to speak. There's a the activity of the dream, but then there's another level that the dream is just a play of consciousness that never changes, is always the same, and is always the totality of all experience.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. There's Amy said, ignorance rises out of consciousness, but consciousness is not ignorant. So is ignorance real? Only in the illusion of separation. Illusions cannot be real. So is ignorance real?
Well, ultimately, the only reality, the reality of everything, is consciousness. But we wouldn't actually say that there's nothing else other than consciousness that has any form of reality. It's really a question of levels, as you've just pointed out. So at a physical level, then tables and chairs have a form of reality, but it's a dependent form of reality. It's dependent on the ultimate reality, which is consciousness. Similarly, bodies and minds, that's dependent on consciousness. Similarly, ignorance. Ignorance is simply the belief to be a separate entity. So that's a thought. And equally, thoughts, all our feelings as well, are real, but that their reality is dependent on consciousness.
Well, yeah, that makes, I mean, it's a relative equation.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. The Catherine uh, just is talking about people who are unkind to you. Observe the reason why they're unkind to you, because they're unkind to themselves, is because they want to suffer. So, because they suffer, they want to make others suffer. Yep. Like energy is attracted to it also. So, the moment you understand they are suffering, that will change your attitude towards them. So, instead of trying to address what they have done to you, you may address beyond their suffering. You go behind the scene on the suffering. Well, I have another thought on that too, Catherine, because, a lot of times we'll attract an experience just as a way, consciousness attracts that energy as a way of looking at itself. And like energies are attracted, we attract terrible situations, and we get to look at our own projections, etc. So you just really can't formalize exactly what things are for, how the play of consciousness is playing out. It could be of any kind, any innumerable different potentials playing itself out. I mean, that's just my take on it.
Yes, and if we're in a situation where there is a lot of negative energy, then the sensible thing, if we can do that, is just to move away from that situation.
And even when you do that, it's not even you making that choice, as we just looked
No.
at. Awareness is making that choiceless decision, that choiceless choice. You think, the bodysuit makes, oh, I'm out of here. But you didn't make that decision. You just took credit for it. A
Yes.
wild?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a wild idea. Here's a question from Barbara, and I think we have time to look at the meditation piece before we close. But so we'll keep looking at the questions. How does the rising or dissolving happen when isn't it all consciousness? There is only consciousness. I, Barb, aka the action figure of consciousness. How does the rising or dissolving happen?
Well, everything is consciousness, but consciousness can either be at rest or in motion. And when there's any experience, then consciousness is in motion, and that experience starts, can have an arising in consciousness, and it quite naturally dissolves into consciousness. So it's just like if you have a flute and you blow air through it, then that will cause the air in the room to vibrate, and there'll be a sound. Before the sound, the air was still. Then when you blew the air, then it made it all vibrate, and there was a sound. When you stop blowing, there's no sound. So it's like that. Yes.
Hmm. That was a great example. Thank you, Jenny. There's Leon has a great question. I love this question actually. So consciousness or the universe planned the extermination of the Jews in Germany rather than Hitler?
No, consciousness never plans anything. Everything is spontaneous. To plan would imply time, would imply the existence and the reality of time. But even from a point of view of physics, we really have no evidence that time is a primary attribute of the universe, and therefore of reality.
Okay, so we really touched on the planning part. It is consciousness the play of consciousness that unfolded in the appearance of the extermination of the Jews in Germany and all other holocausts and travesties that we've had
Yes,
throughout
exactly.
history. Consciousness is just in the play of all of those experiences.
Yes, it just happened, and it happened just through the movement of consciousness. So we can call it play, and in Sanskrit it's called lila.
Okay, so this is an interesting question, and it follows with what Henrik is saying. A person is not responsible for what he or she is doing, really, and that goes back to a relative question.
Well, there's no person, so how could they be? There are no separate persons. The universe chooses our thoughts. There's no. It's a tricky thing to grasp, but when you really grasp it, that is non-duality. Ultimately, it is actually seeing that and feeling that. As no one chooses our thoughts, therefore no one chooses our action. There is no person. Body, even the concept of a body-mind is superimposing some kind of division on the activity of consciousness. If you just take the physical body, it's totally and completely integrated with the universe. Mind, a different realm, the realm of mind. Mind is totally and utterly integrated with all minds. There's no real distinction. We call it my mind and we call it my body, but that's not really right. There's no one who possesses those things, and there aren't those things. They are just superimpositions on the oneness, the completeness, the totality of consciousness.
Yeah, it's a mind blower for the mind.
Yes.
That's why
It is.
the board lights up when we get into these kinds of discussions.
It does.
It blows the mind right out of the water. It goes, wait a minute. Tilt, tilt. Yeah, it's fun. Well, let's move on. There's a couple of other comments, but let's move through the meditation piece. I think it's really important. And if you look at the bottom of page 211, the question is, can you say something about the importance of meditation in relation to everyday life?
Yes, and he starts by reminding us that meditation is not an activity. Meditation is about not knowing, not wanting, not holding on to anything. We are open-handed, open-minded, open-bodied, and open-hearted. And that's such a beautiful statement, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It was Rupert that for the first time in my experience, I was able to grasp the idea that meditation isn't something that we do, but it's something that it's what we are.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Yeah. That is
Yes.
so helpful because I used to sit quiet and just sit in the quiet and I didn't know what the hell I was doing. You know what I mean? I would just think I was doing something that was meaningful in my spiritual growth. And then when I found Rupert, I realized, oh my God, I'm not doing anything. It's just happening.
Yeah, and that's absolutely right. And Francis then goes on to describe how we deal with whatever arises during our meditation. He starts with thinking. And he's got 3 different types of thinking. He said if it's practical thinking, then just postpone it. If it's thinking about the truth in the form of higher reasoning, then that's fine. That can be part of meditation, no problem with that. Or if it's psychological thinking, then we need to investigate who is the beneficiary of this thinking. If we switch our thinking to investigating that, then the thinking becomes higher reasoning, which then destroys the ignorant thinking. So we're switching it from the thought we first had to asking who is the beneficiary of the thought. And then he goes on to feelings, and really exactly the same principles apply with feelings. So practical feelings like I'm hungry, those can be postponed. And what he calls beautiful feelings, so joy or a sense of lightness of being, they're part of the meditation. Then negative feelings, which could be boredom or a sense of lack or fear or desire, things like that, those need to be investigated and not indulged in the same way that we don't indulge in psychological thoughts. So he says we don't investigate them at the level of thought, but instead we trace them back to their source, the presence within which they arise, and he calls that higher feeling. And it's a way of just sensing what it is within which that feeling is arising. So those 2 really go in parallel, which I think makes it very clear, dividing them up in that way.
Yeah, I'm grateful for, it goes back to, don't do this and rather do this instead. I'm grateful that consciousness, awareness has a parachute. It has a parachute to keep itself from living eternally in this the of thinking that it's this.
Yes.
Right? So I am grateful for that, but it sure does sound like choices are being made and discretion is being accessed.
Well, it does, but in practice, it isn't actually that, because everyone here has now heard all of those things. I read them on a number of occasions, so I heard them, I talked about them. So none of that, Francis originally wrote them. None of that was anything to do with any person. And then suddenly, when any of us are meditating later, then what we will find is, I was just having a practical thought. And you just automatically, I'll leave that.
Yes.
And it's not a choice. It just happens because you've heard it.
Yeah.
But you've heard it not because anyone chose that you heard it. You just heard it. That was a happening as well. It was just written in the book. That was a happening too. When Francis originally spoke it, that just happened. None of it is to do with choice.
Yeah, that's funny. That's really good. My wife often, something out of the blue will happen like that, and she'll go, "That just happened." Yeah, very similar. On page 213, the top of the page, Francis said, don't worry if everything is not clear. So before that, it says, in this way, there is no clear-cut separation between meditation and daily life. There is no separation because meditation encompasses both activity and repose. Don't worry if everything is not clear. It will eventually become clear if you are interested. meditate from what you understand about meditation, such as benevolent indifference or welcoming the totality of your experience without exceptions, or remaining in not knowing, or just being as you are without goals, or offering your thoughts, sense perceptions, and feeling to the presence in which they arise. Any of these suggestions will take you to meditation. I love that. He's just going.
Yes, and he uses one or other of these, or a few others as well, when he does his guided meditations that some of us have been listening to, and he'll start that way, and he'll just choose one of them, like benevolent indifference, and he will just take us there, and then he'll go on from that a little bit. That's one way that we can all discover how to, well, have examples of how to meditate, is just listen to some of his guided meditations on his YouTube channel. There's a number of them, Mike. There's 7 or 8 of them.
Good idea.
Yeah.
Thank you. And if you feel like depositing any of those in the Pure Presence Facebook group, that would be great. Appreciate that. And then he goes down and he says, I love this too, because this is how easy it is to get back into the self, to get back into the peace that we are. He halfway down on this same page, 213, or actually halfway down the next paragraph, he starts off with the sentence, 3 seconds of spontaneous meditation that happen when we seize the moment have more value than hours of false meditation towards a goal, towards a personal goal.
Yes, I think that's such an important point. It's not, he says, it's not a state of the mind. We sort of expect it to be a pleasurable state, but if we do expect something out of meditation, then inevitably we're going to think we've got it wrong when we don't get what we expect. And part of meditating is to not expect anything.
Yeah.
Just be completely without expectation.
Yeah.
He says meditation is not a state, it is freedom from all states. So there is no goal.
Right. It's a beingness. We're learning to understand our essential nature, which is only being.
Yes.
And allowing and welcoming. He says, it is not a question of duration, it's a question of intensity and spontaneity. That is all it takes to take us right to the absolute. As we become more and more one-pointed, we will develop the skill to seize these moments, and these moments will seem to become more and more frequent until they become one single moment. It is called the stabilization process. I love that, and it gives hope for beings that are not stable. It gives hope, and it gives a pointer to beings that are really on the path of truth and beingness, and he's our guide. He's our temporary guide, and until we realize that he's not there, and we just live in the same moment and movement that the one we call Francis. Yeah.
Yes, it's not difficult, but it does require interest. It's driven by our interest. If our interest is strong enough, then it will happen. That stabilization, that default state will arise. But the powerhouse is our interest and our love of just enjoying that presence.
Yeah. There's in the last page of chapter 14, page 214, there's a statement that Francis says, we should make our interaction with others part of our meditation practice. And I like that suggestion because it just means that's what we're doing right now. That's this. This is meditation. You all chose to come to the book study for an extended additional meditation, and when we hang up from this, we'll go back to a meditation with whatever we're doing.
Yes, and it doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't have to be with people who know anything about this. It can just be the people we interact with at work, or other members of our family, or people we meet on the bus, or whatever. It can be with anyone.
Yeah.
All of that can be meditation.
Right. He says, in your interaction with others, practice benevolent indifference, listening to and welcoming what they say, do, or project, and also your own responses without resistance. That will go a long way in transforming our life. Here. I would say that'll also save your marriage.
Yes.
Or your friendships, because I mean that's something I really learned after I almost did get divorced. This would have been good advice at that point, but actually I didn't need it because now I've learned it, and it does make a difference.
Yes, and it's important that we welcome our own responses as well as other people's responses. So it's perfectly natural in some occasions to feel anger at what's happening, and we just welcome that anger. That anger has just arisen. It's come from consciousness. And we welcome it in the same way that the behavior that gave rise to that anger also came from consciousness. We welcome all of it, everything.
Yeah, well, there's Jenny. Have you noticed how much comment? There's still a lot of comment on the
Fast.
on.
Sorry, I haven't had time to read all of it.
Well, I wasn't either, but I'm looking at it now, and then there's quite a bit of thread for the whole idea of taking responsibility. And a little bit down, Rick says, it seems we have an overwhelming tendency to dummy awareness, reality down to a very human or mind view, ignorance in action. I think that's true. And
That's
Catherine,
very good. Yes, that's
yeah, I
very
think
good.
that's and then Catherine says this wisdom that you are, I share the same awareness, then we are going to be in harmony, and that is what God wants us to do. So there should not be any real opposition in the do and don't and what we actually do. I don't know. I think if you're invested in that play, that you've taken your focus, you've really identified as the play instead of consciousness that's at play.
Yes, if you feel there is a me, then you're already in ignorance.
Yeah.
And that's just really the end of the matter. When you're not in ignorance, then you see everything as just arising in consciousness. There's responsibility in the sense, not in a I should have done this, or if this happens, I should do this. That's not responsibility. There's responsibility in spontaneity and in allowing spontaneity. Because if you allow spontaneity, then you will your actions won't be filtered through that feeling of separation, that ignorance. So. I would prefer to use the word spontaneity rather than responsibility, because responsibility it implies a code of ethics. It implies a fixed set of laws or standards of behavior, or something which does not denote complete freedom. And I think the understanding that awareness is complete freedom, absolutely complete enough to be as horrific as it wants to be, and complete to be as beautiful as it wants to be, both. I think it's a hard thing to understand, but that understanding comes from the understanding of not being a separate entity.
Yes. Yeah, and it really does boil down to we're using words and scenarios and ideas, and what happens in the time and space bodysuit experiences, and to speak of the terms that are outside of time and space, there's no relationship.
Yes.
Yeah. Rick said not to harm you. I'm lost in that.
I think there's still a me in that question.
Yeah.
And what I'd say generally in answer to all of these questions is look for that sense of me. Because if you really feel that there is no sense of a separate me, all of these questions really do just disappear.
Yeah, I think it was Rick's question I was thinking was Amy's, because Rick really hits the nail right on the head. Consciousness simply doesn't distinguish between good or evil or ignorance. Only a judging mind makes this distinction. Yeah. Only
Yes.
only a personal self makes
only
that.
Only ignorance makes that distinction. Yes.
Yeah. And Anne says it reaches its perfection at the moment of goodwill. That's so lovely. There is no grade exam. Yeah. Henrik says, sorry, but what's the point if I can't choose, have no responsibility, and just exist? What am I missing here? Suffering? You're missing
that would be a key thing.
Henrik.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's just enjoyment. Richard is reading a book, a philosophy book called The Meaning of Life, Short Introduction to the Meaning of Life. And the author goes into all sorts of different philosophers and what they say.
Wait, Jenny, it's not Richard. It's not Rick West. It's your Richard.
Yes, it's my Richard. Yes.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the meaning of life is surely just enjoyment. It is surely just happiness and enjoyment. And if we discover that we really are not separate from everything, if we really discover what we are, then quite naturally there is enjoyment. And who needs any more meaning than that?
Oh, yeah, yeah. And also, we're just talking about having an understanding so that you can relate to your time and space experience without being pulled into it reactionary and losing yourself in the person.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And it looks like Catherine was quoting something from Francis. My response was a quote from Francis. Well, we've come to the end of our time, and I guess we can look at this next week. And thank you all for being here. I have to meet the highway department in about 15 minutes. They're working on the front of my street here, and they are going to meet me at 1:15, so I have to go. And thank you all for being here. Thank you, Jenny, for your awesome wisdom, and everyone for your comments and great questions. This has been a joyful chapter 14. We'll start with chapter 15 next week. We only have 3 chapters left. I can't believe that. And we'll see you guys next Tuesday.